4 stages an avoidant goes through after a breakup. Let me ask you a question. How many of you have ever gone through a breakup that left you feeling lost, stuck, or even numb? Maybe you thought you were fine, but deep down, something was off. You see, for someone with an avoidant attachment style, a breakup doesn't feel like a bomb going off. It's more like a slow, silent unraveling. And if you don't understand the process, you'll stay trapped in it. But here's the good news. Once you recognize the 4 stages, you take back control. When an avoidant person goes through a breakup, their reaction is often very different from what most people expect. Instead of experiencing immediate heartbreak, deep sorrow, or a desperate longing to reconnect, they often feel an overwhelming sense of relief. It's not that they didn't care about their partner. It's not that the relationship was meaningless to them, but their attachment style has conditioned them to associate closeness with discomfort and distance with safety. This sense of relief can be deceiving, both to the avoidant and to those around them. On the outside, they may appear unbothered. They go about their daily routines, invest more time into work, pick up new hobbies, or even start dating again without much hesitation. Their friends might look at them and think, wow, they're handling this so well. But the truth is, they're not handling it, they're avoiding it. There's a fundamental difference between moving on and distracting yourself from feeling, and for an avoidant, distraction is their default setting. At this stage, they may even convince themselves that the breakup was the best thing that could have happened. They justify it by focusing on all the negatives of the relationship. Maybe their partner was too needy, too emotional, or always wanting to talk about feelings. These justifications help them reinforce the idea that they are better off alone. They may even feel a sense of pride in their ability to detach so easily. After all, independence is something they've always valued. But what they don't realize is that this independence is often a defense mechanism, one built to shield them from the very thing they fear most, vulnerability. One of the most common behaviors during this phase is overcompensation. Instead of sitting with their emotions, they throw themselves into work, fitness, or social activities. They might start working late hours, taking on extra projects, or even traveling spontaneously, all in an effort to fill the space left behind. Some might turn to dating apps, not necessarily because they're ready for a new connection, but because it offers a quick way to reinforce their sense of control. It's not about love, it's about proving to themselves that they don't need anyone. But underneath this facade is a quiet, unspoken truth. Their nervous system is in survival mode. Avoidants have learned, often from early experiences, that relying on others can lead to disappointment or loss. So they shut down emotions before they can even rise to the surface. They intellectualize the breakup, treating it like a logical decision rather than an emotional experience. Instead of saying, I'm hurting, they say this wasn't working. Instead of acknowledging the bond they had, they focus on why it had to end. In their minds, detachment is the best form of self-protection. They believe that by staying distant from their emotions, they are preventing themselves from experiencing real pain. But in reality, they are only delaying it. Because the thing about emotions is, they don't just disappear when ignored, they build up like pressure in a dam. And at some point, whether weeks, months, or even years later, that dam starts to crack. This initial relief phase is what sets the stage for the emotional turbulence that will eventually follow. But because they don't feel the loss immediately, avoidants often underestimate just how deeply they were affected. They assume they've already moved on, that they're stronger than they actually are. This is why so many avoidants cycle through the same patterns in relationships. They leave before they can get hurt, then convince themselves they didn't care enough for it to matter, but deep down something does matter. It always has. The key challenge in this stage is that it reinforces the avoidant's belief that they don't need emotional closeness. They look at how well they're handling the breakup and use it as evidence that relationships aren't necessary for their happiness. But what they don't realize is that their version of handling it isn't the same as healing from it. Healing requires feeling, and feeling requires vulnerability, two things avoidants have spent their whole lives trying to escape. And so while they may appear fine, while they may even convince themselves they are fine, the truth remains. The real work hasn't even begun. At first, everything seems fine. The avoidant has successfully pushed the breakup out of their mind. They tell themselves it was the right decision. They move forward, keeping themselves busy, avoiding emotional triggers, and focusing on anything but their past relationship. But then something happens. It's never planned. It's never expected. It could be the smell of a familiar perfume in a crowded elevator, a song that used to play in the background during lazy Sunday mornings, a message from a mutual friend mentioning their ex's name in passing. And suddenly a wave of emotions crashes into them, shattering the illusion that they were completely unaffected. This is the moment the avoidant starts to feel, truly feel the aftershocks of the breakup. But instead of embracing these emotions, they do what they've always done. They suppress them. They tell themselves it's just a random thought, nothing to dwell on. They shake it off, go for a run, dive into work, or scroll endlessly on their phone to create some mental noise. The last thing they want is to sit with the discomfort, because feeling means acknowledging, and acknowledging means facing the truth, that the relationship meant more to them than they initially admitted. For the avoidant, emotions are like echoes. They don't hit all at once. Instead, they ripple through the subconscious, surfacing at unexpected moments before quickly being shut down again. This cycle continues, with emotions creeping in, being denied, then creeping in again. Each time, the avoidant reassures themselves that they're fine, that they're strong, that they don't need to dwell on the past. But what they don't realize is that ignoring emotions doesn't make them disappear. It only buries them deeper, where they fester beneath the surface. During this stage, avoidants often experience moments of internal conflict. On one hand, they pride themselves on being independent, self-sufficient, and unaffected. On the other, there's an undeniable tug, a lingering connection to what once was. They might start having fleeting memories of happy moments in the relationship, moments they once dismissed as insignificant. They might wake up from a dream about their ex, feeling a pang of emotion they can't quite place. And while they quickly brush it aside, there's a part of them that starts to wonder, why am I thinking about this? I thought I was over it. This is where avoidance turns into resistance. Instead of simply ignoring their emotions, they actively fight them. They convince themselves it's just nostalgia, not real feelings. They remind themselves of all the reasons the relationship wasn't perfect. They double down on their belief that moving on means shutting off, and yet, no matter how much they push their emotions away, they keep returning like whispers in the dark. This stage can be frustrating for an avoidant because it contradicts the identity they've built for themselves. They've always seen themselves as strong, logical, and in control. Feeling something deeply, especially over a relationship they thought they had moved past, threatens that sense of control. So they try harder. They reinforce their emotional walls. They tell themselves they're just overthinking, that time will fix everything. And in some cases, they might even start seeking distractions in unhealthy ways, casual relationships, excessive work, partying, or anything that keeps their mind occupied. But the body always remembers what the mind tries to forget. The nervous system stores emotional pain, even if the conscious mind refuses to acknowledge it. And so, even as the avoidant convinces themselves they are fine, their body tells a different story. Maybe they start feeling restless at night. Maybe anxiety creeps in at unexpected moments. Maybe they find themselves irritated over small things, snapping at others without knowing why. These are all signs that something deeper is trying to surface, something that can't be ignored forever. This is where many avoidants make a crucial mistake. Instead of recognizing these emotional echoes as a sign that healing needs to happen, they see them as proof that emotions are a weakness. They shut down even further, they double down on avoidance, and in doing so, they prolong their pain instead of processing it. But emotions don't go away just because they're ignored. They accumulate, waiting for a moment to be acknowledged. And whether the avoidant realizes it or not, the more they suppress, the stronger the emotional waves will become. It's not a question of if they will surface. It's a question of when. The silent longing stage is where the avoidant starts to feel the weight of what they've lost, even if they don't want to admit it. Up until now, they've convinced themselves that they were unaffected, that moving on was easy, that they didn't need the relationship in the first place. But emotions have a way of creeping in no matter how hard they try to suppress them. It doesn't happen all at once. It's not a dramatic realization. Instead, it's a slow, creeping feeling, one that lingers in the background of their thoughts, growing stronger over time. At first, it starts subtly. Maybe they catch themselves reminiscing about small moments, things they never thought they'd miss. The way their ex used to laugh at their jokes, the comfort of simply existing next to someone without needing to say a word, the little inside jokes only the two of them understood. These memories come unexpectedly, often when they least expect them. They might be driving home after a long day, scrolling through their phone, or lying awake at night, when suddenly the thought of their ex surfaces, and for a moment, there's a pang of something that feels uncomfortably close to longing. But avoidants don't like to admit longing. They don't like to admit attachment. So their immediate response is to rationalize it away. It's just a passing thought. I don't actually miss them. I just miss the comfort. I'm only thinking about them because I'm bored. They come up with a dozen reasons why these emotions aren't real, why they don't matter, why they shouldn't pay attention to them. But despite their best efforts, the thoughts keep returning. And one of the most common things an avoidant does in this phase is idealizing the relationship. They start filtering their memories, remembering only the good times, while conveniently ignoring the reasons things didn't work out. The arguments, the incompatibilities, the emotional disconnection. all of that fades into the background. Instead, their mind replays the happiest moments, making it seem like the relationship was perfect. This selective memory isn't intentional. It's a defense mechanism, because if they admit the full truth, they'd have to confront the pain of losing something that once mattered to them. This is the stage where many avoidants begin subtle forms of checking in on their ex, even if they'd never admit it. They might reread old texts, scroll through pictures, or casually check their ex's social media just to see how they're doing. They don't reach out. They don't say anything. They just observe from a distance, convincing themselves it's harmless. But deep down, there's a pull, a curiosity, a quiet desire to know if their ex still thinks about them too. At the same time, pride keeps them from acting on these feelings. Even if they want to reach out, they don't. Even if they feel the urge to reconnect, they suppress it. To an avoidant, vulnerability feels like weakness, and admitting that they miss someone, even to themselves, feels like giving up control. So instead of doing anything about these feelings, they sit with them in silence, pretending they don't exist. This internal battle creates a state of emotional limbo. They're not fully over the relationship, but they won't allow themselves to fully acknowledge that either. They keep themselves stuck in a cycle of longing and denial, feeling something but refusing to act on it. And because they don't share these emotions with anyone, it becomes an isolating experience. This is also the phase where distractions become more tempting than ever. The avoidant might throw themselves into work, social outings, or even new relationships, not because they're ready, but because they want to escape the emotions they don't want to face. They might convince themselves they're fine, that moving forward means replacing the past with something new, but deep down, a part of them knows they're running. The irony of this stage is that the avoidant often believes they're in control, but in reality, their emotions are controlling them. The more they fight against their feelings, the stronger those feelings become. The more they suppress their longing, the more it lingers beneath the surface. They don't realize that healing doesn't come from avoidance. It comes from acceptance. But until they're ready to face that truth, they remain caught in a cycle of silent longing, unable to move forward, yet unwilling to look back. Without self-awareness, avoidants remain trapped in a cycle they don't even realize they're repeating. They believe they are moving forward, but in reality, they are simply running in circles, avoiding the very emotions that need to be processed. This stage is where the deeper, often subconscious patterns begin to reveal themselves, if they are willing to see them. But for many avoidants, the instinct is not to reflect, but to retreat. They rely on old habits, old defenses, and old narratives to keep themselves from confronting the real emotional work. At this point, they've felt the emotional echoes creeping in. They've experienced the unexpected waves of nostalgia. They've caught themselves checking an old message thread or hearing a familiar song that stirs something inside them. But instead of sitting with those emotions, they default to avoidance. This isn't always an intentional decision. It's often automatic, something they've been doing since childhood without even realizing it. Avoidants develop their attachment style as a survival mechanism. At some point in their lives, whether through early relationships, past heartbreaks, or deep-seated fears, they learn that closeness comes with a cost. Maybe they grew up in an environment where emotional needs weren't consistently met. Maybe they were taught that being independent was the only way to stay safe. Maybe past relationships reinforced the idea that vulnerability leads to disappointment. Whatever the reason, they internalize the belief that emotional distance equals protection. And that belief doesn't just disappear because a relationship ended, it remains deeply ingrained, shaping the way they process breakups and emotional pain. So instead of acknowledging that they're struggling, they double down on their belief that emotions are unnecessary. They tell themselves they are logical, rational people who don't get caught up in sentimentality. They look at others who grieve openly and think that's weakness. They convince themselves they are superior for moving on quickly, not realizing that their version of moving on is actually just running away. This lack of self-awareness leads to destructive patterns. Many avoidants jump into distractions, whether it's burying themselves in work, pursuing casual relationships, or keeping themselves so busy that they never have time to think about what they've lost. On the surface, they appear fine. They may even convince themselves they are thriving, but beneath the surface, unresolved emotions build up, and without addressing those emotions, they are bound to repeat the same cycles in their future relationships. One of the most common patterns is the avoidant's tendency to seek connection again, only to reject it when it gets too close. They may enter new relationships believing they are ready, only to pull away the moment things become serious. They may rekindle old relationships out of nostalgia, only to find themselves emotionally shutting down when faced with real intimacy. This back and forth dynamic is not intentional. It is a result of deeply rooted fears they haven't yet confronted. Another common pattern is the pendulum swing between avoidance and longing. When they are alone, they may feel a quiet, nagging sense of emptiness, a subtle recognition that something is missing. But the moment they have an opportunity for closeness, that feeling turns to discomfort and they retreat again. This push-pull dynamic is exhausting, both for the avoidant and for anyone who tries to love them. But without self-awareness, they don't see the pattern, they only see their temporary feelings in each moment. What makes this stage so difficult is that the avoidant often believes they are in control, when in reality their fears are controlling them. They believe they are making rational choices when in truth they are being led by subconscious wounds. They believe they are avoiding pain when in fact they are only prolonging it, and until they recognize this, they will continue repeating the same cycles, wondering why relationships never seem to work out the way they hope. For an avoidant, the hardest realization is that their fear of vulnerability is not protecting them, it is isolating them. The walls they build to keep out pain also keep out love, connection, and true emotional fulfillment. But breaking free from these patterns requires a willingness to see them first. It requires self-awareness, because without it, they will continue running from the very thing they are searching for, without ever realizing it's been in front of them all along. At this stage, the avoidant begins to feel a deeper sense of discomfort that they can no longer ignore. The distractions they once relied on, work, hobbies, casual relationships, or social outings, no longer seem to be enough. There's an underlying feeling they can't quite place, a restlessness that lingers no matter how much they try to suppress it. It's as if their mind and body are signaling that something unresolved is lurking beneath the surface, waiting to be addressed. And this is often the point where an avoidant starts questioning their own patterns, though they may not fully understand them yet. They might begin to wonder why they keep experiencing the same cycles in relationships, why they always feel relieved after a breakup, only to later feel a sense of emptiness, why they can go long periods without missing someone, only to suddenly be hit with unexpected waves of longing, why they struggle with emotional closeness, even when they deeply care about someone. These questions may come in fleeting moments, quickly dismissed as overthinking, but the fact that they arise at all signals the beginning of an internal shift. At the same time, the fear of vulnerability remains strong. Avoidants have spent years, sometimes a lifetime, training themselves to suppress emotions as a form of self-protection. To them, emotions often feel overwhelming, unpredictable, or even dangerous. The idea of opening up, of truly facing their own pain, feels like a risk they aren't sure they want to take. So even as they start to sense something is off, they hesitate to fully confront it. They tell themselves they are fine, that time will eventually heal everything, but deep down, a part of them knows that time alone doesn't heal. Acknowledging and processing emotions does. One of the most challenging aspects of this stage is that the avoidant may still resist taking responsibility for their role in the breakup. Up until now, they may have convinced themselves that their ex was the problem, that the relationship ended because the other person was too emotional, too needy, or too demanding. But as they reflect, they start to see patterns. They start to notice that this isn't the first time they've felt this way, that this isn't the first time they've pulled away from emotional closeness. And while it's easier to blame external factors, they begin to realize that some of their struggles come from within. This realization can be uncomfortable. It's far easier to believe that relationships fail because of incompatibility than to recognize that deeply ingrained fears and attachment wounds might be playing a role. But for those who are willing to be honest with themselves, this stage can be the first step toward true growth. It's the point where they start to ask, what am I afraid of? Why do I always react this way? What am I trying to avoid? These questions may not have immediate answers, but simply asking them is a sign of progress. Another key aspect of this stage is the gradual recognition that avoidance is not the same as healing. Up until now, the avoidant may have believed that distancing themselves from emotions was a form of strength. They may have told themselves that suppressing pain was the best way to move on. But as time goes on, they begin to realize that ignoring emotions doesn't make them disappear. It only delays the inevitable. They start to see that true healing doesn't come from running away, but from facing what they've been avoiding. This is where some avoidants start seeking personal growth, whether consciously or unconsciously. They may begin reading about attachment styles, psychology, or emotional patterns. They may start journaling, reflecting on their past relationships in a way they never have before. They may even consider therapy or coaching, though the idea of opening up to someone else about their emotions may still feel daunting. Even if they aren't ready to fully embrace vulnerability yet, they are at least beginning to acknowledge that something needs to change. For others, this stage may come with a desire to reconnect with their ex, not necessarily because they want the relationship back, but because they feel the need for closure. They may want to apologize, to explain their actions, or simply to see if there is still a chance for connection. However, if they haven't truly done the inner work yet, this can sometimes be another form of avoidance, a way to seek external reassurance instead of fully processing their emotions on their own. Ultimately, this stage is about discomfort and awareness. The avoidant is no longer completely numb, nor are they fully healed. They are in between, caught in the tension of old habits and new realizations. The road ahead isn't easy, and many will still resist doing the deeper emotional work. But for those who are willing to take the next step, this stage marks the beginning of something new, the possibility of real change. Reaching the point of true healing and growth is a slow and often uncomfortable process for an avoidant. It's not something that happens overnight, nor is it a straight path. It's filled with moments of resistance, self-reflection, and realization. But self-care wants us to realize that at some point, if they allow themselves to go through the necessary inner work, something shifts. They begin to understand themselves in a way they never have before. They start recognizing the patterns that have shaped their relationships, and more importantly, they realize that those patterns no longer serve them. For so long, they believed that distance was their strength, that keeping emotions at bay was the key to staying in control. They saw vulnerability as something to be feared, something that made them weak. But through self-awareness and reflection, they begin to question those beliefs. They start to see that emotional closeness isn't a threat, but a fundamental part of connection. They realize that shutting people out doesn't prevent pain. It only prolongs loneliness. This realization doesn't come all at once. It happens in layers. Maybe they read something that resonates deeply with them, an article about attachment styles, a book on emotional intelligence, or a story that mirrors their own experience. Maybe they have a conversation with a friend who gently points out patterns they hadn't noticed before. Maybe they go to therapy for the first time, hesitant at first, but slowly opening up to the idea that change is possible. With each new layer of understanding, they begin to take responsibility for their role in past relationships. This doesn't mean blaming themselves for everything or dwelling in guilt. It simply means recognizing the ways in which their fears and avoidance have influenced their actions. They start to see the ways they pulled away when things got too close, how they dismissed their partner's emotional needs, how they convinced themselves they didn't care even when they did. This level of honesty is difficult, but it's also freeing, because once they see the patterns, they have the power to change them. One of the most profound shifts and avoidant experiences during this stage is learning to sit with their emotions instead of running from them. This doesn't mean they suddenly become emotionally expressive overnight, but they stop fearing their own feelings. They no longer push emotions away the moment they surface. Instead, they allow themselves to feel, to acknowledge sadness, loneliness, longing, or even regret without immediately shutting down. They learn that emotions aren't enemies, they are signals guiding them toward healing. As they become more comfortable with their own emotions, they also start to develop deeper empathy for others. In past relationships, they may have struggled to understand their partner's need for closeness. They may have seen emotional conversations as overwhelming or unnecessary. But with growth, they start to see things differently. They begin to understand that emotional connection is not about control or dependency, it's about trust. They realize that allowing someone in doesn't mean losing themselves, it means building something meaningful together. This is also the stage where they start practicing vulnerability in small but significant ways. Maybe they reach out to a friend when they're struggling instead of handling everything alone. Maybe they express how they feel instead of assuming the other person should just know. Maybe they allow themselves to miss someone without immediately suppressing it. These small moments of openness add up over time, helping them build a new foundation for connection. Another key part of this stage is breaking the cycle of avoidance in future relationships. Instead of repeating old patterns, they begin to approach relationships differently. They no longer see intimacy as something to escape, but as something to build. They recognize when they are withdrawing out of habit, and instead of shutting down, they communicate. They no longer assume that independence means emotional detachment, but rather that true independence comes from knowing they can handle emotions without running from them. Healing for an avoidant doesn't mean they become a completely different person. They will always value their space, their autonomy, and their sense of self. But the difference is that they no longer use avoidance as a shield. They no longer let fear dictate their connections. They learn to balance independence with intimacy, solitude with connection, logic with emotion. Most importantly, they realize that love isn't about losing oneself. It's about allowing someone in while still staying true to who they are. And for the first time, they see that real love, deep, fulfilling, lasting love, isn't built on avoidance. It's built on courage, presence, and the willingness to truly be seen. And so we come to the truth that so many avoidants spend years, sometimes a lifetime, avoiding. Healing doesn't happen through distance. Growth doesn't come from shutting people out. The cycle only stops when you choose to face yourself, to sit with the discomfort, to acknowledge the emotions you've worked so hard to suppress. Avoidance may have once been your shield, but what if you didn't need protection anymore? What if instead of running, you allowed yourself to stand still and feel? What if you understood that true strength isn't in suppressing emotions, but in learning how to hold them? Real healing doesn't mean changing who you are. It means recognizing that love and connection don't require sacrificing your independence. They require presence, awareness, and the courage to be seen, not just by others, but by yourself. The past does not have to define the future. The patterns you've lived with are not permanent. But change doesn't happen by chance. It happens by choice. The question is, are you ready to make that choice? Are you ready to break free from avoidance and step into something deeper, something real? Because when you do, when you truly let yourself embrace the full depth of life and love, you'll realize something powerful. You were never meant to do this alone. Thank you for your time, your energy, and your willingness to listen. And more importantly, thank yourself for taking this step toward awareness, for opening yourself to the possibility of transformation, and for choosing, even if just for a moment, to stop running. Your journey is yours to create, and I know it leads somewhere incredible. Thank you.